All right, let's go ahead and jump into your next lesson, which is one-step equations with multiplication and division. So if we head to our page sorter here, let's go ahead and look at our learning goals. We just got done doing one-step equations with addition subtraction, and today we're doing learning goal number 29, which is one step with multiplication and division. So let's head up here. Here was our 28, and today is our 29. Okay, all right, and we'll go ahead down to our vocab here. Today we're going to be working on the multiplication and division properties. And so if you take a look, it just says that with division property, if you divide the same value to each side, the sides remain equal. Same thing with multiplication. Multiply to each side, the sides remain equal. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that property and solve these out. So the goal to solving any equation is to isolate the variable or get the variable alone or by itself. Okay. All right. Now, similar in sixth grade, the opposite operation, the inverse operation from multiplication was division, and the opposite division was multiplication. Okay. And so we're going to use a different term, though, when we're doing the division of fractions, which is the multiplicative inverse. So we're not going to do that for everything, though. So we'll get into that in a moment. Before we get started, though, go ahead and let's officially turn these into coefficients, okay, and make them all be times x. So now what I want to do is I want to notice that there are two that have fractions, okay, so that's something to be aware of. The rest don't, okay, so they'll be a little less complicated. Let's go ahead and look at number one. And I actually want you to just watch first and don't write this, okay? I'm just setting up something for you. So I see that I have x times 5/8. So normally to get rid of a 5/8 that has been multiplied, I would do the opposite or the inverse operation. And so the inverse of multiplication would be to divide by 5/8, okay? If I separate my workspace and do that over here, I have -7 divided by 5/8. Now, what do we know about dividing by fractions? Right, we don't do it. We multiply by the reciprocal. So that means I would then have to write -7/1 times 8/5. I just wasted a lot of writing to do that. Okay, so since we know that when we're dividing by a fraction, we end up multiplying by the reciprocal, we might as well just do that at the beginning to save time. And so that's the background into why we're doing what we're doing. So when you see multiplying by a fraction, we're just going to, on the side here, multiply by the reciprocal, okay? And what that's going to do is it essentially is dividing by the fraction and eliminating it. However, if you look, like this equals 40/40, which does create a 1 next to an x. And so because of the identity property, we usually just sort of like don't pay attention to that and we just write x, okay? And so that's what we're going to be doing here is multiplying by the reciprocal. It makes this go away because it creates one whole, and we're left with x. So whatever we do to one side, though, we have to do to the other. And so I'm going to make this over 1, and we're going to multiply by the 8/5. And when we multiply straight across, you can see we have -56 divided by 5 or over 5. Okay. All right, and now we do need to do that annoying part of checking, but it's really important because this is where you find out you made mistakes sometimes, especially with the negatives. So I'm going to substitute exactly. So I have 5/8 times x, and x is -56/5 equals -7, we hope. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cross simplify. And I have divided by 5 makes 1, divided by 8 is 1, divided by 8 is -7. Okay, and so if you multiply straight across, you can see -7 equals -7, and this checks out. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one. Again, we have multiplying by a fraction. And so instead of dividing by 1/7, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. We're going to do that to both sides, okay, and multiply by, instead of 7/1, I can just put times 7. This creates a 1 whole, so I'm left with x equal, and then I can do my 48 times 7, and we get 336. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do our check and substitute for x. So we have times 336 over 1, hopefully equals 48. You don't need to rewrite all this. You can just sort of see that it's 336 divided by 7. And we end up with 48 equals 48, and so we're good. All right, take a look at this one. So I'm going to give you a tip with this. This is why we've been asking you, what is the coefficient? So this looks super confusing until you identify the coefficient. So the coefficient of n is 1. And then I want you to draw this, because look how simple this makes this look. Okay, this is really 1 over -4, okay, times n over 1, okay? And what they did was they just joined these together and got rid of the 1 because of the identity property and just wrote n over -4. So you need to be able to understand and see that to see that this is 1 over -4. So we have n times 1 over -4, okay? So we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is -4 over 1. We need to do the same thing to both sides. Since it's over 1 and I don't have a fraction over here, I can just do times -4. And this creates 1n equals -20. Let's go ahead and do our check, okay? -20 over -4 equals 5. My negatives times a negatives is a positive, so we have 20 divided by 4, 5 equals 5, and that checks out as accurate. All right, let's go ahead and do this one. Now notice I don't have a fraction, so I can easily just do the opposite operation and do the inverse. So I have times a -5, I can just divide by -5, which still, notice, creates the 1x. Do that to both sides, because what we do to one, we do to the other, and we end up with x equals -7. We're going to go ahead and plug that in or substitute with our check. So we have a -5 times a -7. Notice I'm putting that in parentheses, equals 35, negative times a negative, and we are good. Okay. All right, number 5. If we use the same understanding with number 3 with number 5, you could possibly pause and see if you can figure this one out on your own. All right, so what is the coefficient? It's not just negative, it's a -1. And so if I do this little trick of making the fraction stand out, you can see we have -1 over 0.6. So how do I create 1 whole? Well, I multiply by the reciprocal. So now that I see that, I can easily see 0.6 over -1, but I'm going to put the -1 on top. Okay. All right. This removes this. I need to do the same to both sides. And so I have 2.4 times -0.6. We can go ahead and do this on the side real quick. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 2 is this. We have 2 decimal movements in our problem. And so we end up with 1.44. I'm going to make a mistake here on purpose, okay? So I end up with x equals 1.44, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and check our work now. So I have a negative, and then I'm going to substitute x, which is 1.44, and that was over 0.6, okay? And then it's equivalent to 2.4. So I have a negative 1.44, so I'm going to do 1.44 negative divided by 0.6, which gives me negative 2.4. So my reason for showing you this is where I go, oh, crud, I made a mistake, specifically with something with my signs. So I'm going to go back and look and try to see what I did wrong. And I see right here that this here was a positive times a negative. So this should have been a negative 1.44. So if I substitute that in for x, I actually have minus on the outside times the negative. So I have opposite of that, which actually creates a positive, which would create a positive 24 or 2.4 at the end. So now I fixed my mistake and I'm good. All right, last one here. The y is on the other side. It doesn't matter. You follow the same procedures. So this is a y times 2/3. How do I turn that into 1y? I'm going to multiply, instead of divide 2/3, I'm multiplying by the reciprocal, okay? That gets rid of this. I need to do the same thing to both sides. So multiply by the reciprocal, okay? Now I have y on this side, don't switch its sides, and I have 3/2 times a negative 2/9. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up here because it's easier for me to work with, okay? I can just multiply straight across, or I can cross simplify, which is going to make my math work a little easier later, okay? So I'm going to cross simplify these, and I have divided by 3, divide by 2, divide by 2 is a negative 1, okay? And so now I can see if I multiply across, I have negative 1/3, okay? I'm going to go ahead and substitute for y. So I need to rewrite exactly. I have a negative 2/9 equals 2/3 times negative 1/3. And when we multiply straight across, I end up with negative 2/9 equals negative 2/9. Okay, and this checks out. All right, so that is it for multiplying and dividing. I forgot to do this up here. I do want you to see this. I was supposed to do that first. Okay, so now you'll be extra good because you've already experienced that. So when I have a 7 times x, let's go ahead and fill this out now. It is a 7 times x. I can just divide by 7. It creates a 1x down here. Okay, I have an x times negative 21. I can divide by negative 21, which is 1 whole, and creates x. When we're multiplying by fractions, I'm not going to divide by 2/3. We're going to instead multiply by the reciprocal. By doing that, I create 1 whole because this creates 6/6, and I end up with x. Okay. Over here, I'm multiplying by negative 1/8, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. Again, if this helps you to put the negative symbol up there, do that. So I'm going to multiply by 8 over negative 1, or negative 8 over 1, and I end up with 1x. And then the last one, I can divide, because I was multiplying, by negative 3.25, and that creates 1 whole, or 1x. So that is our process for one-step equations with multiplication and division.